I want to take this opportunity to introduce our two luncheon speakers. One of the absolutely amazing treats of getting to work in a place like USC Annenberg is not only do I have smart colleagues, but I have students who are smarter than their professors. And the two people who have agreed to spend a few moments with you today really evidence that. They have sent me the kind of biographical paragraphs that their mother would write. I'm going to abbreviate it to the kind of biographical paragraphs that their father would believe. So I'm going to edit them just a little bit with their permission if I can. First, Whit was a 2010-2012 Fulbright Scholar. He comes from Thailand. These are both doctoral students at USC. He has a master's in health communication from Penn State University, extensive experience working with different health organizations, PR, advertising firms. Most interestingly, at the moment, he's been really involved in programs about HIV prevention and in a big project that Annenberg is conducting on human trafficking. Okay? So that's his sort of background, and he can tell you more because I'm sure he'll be happy to do that, but I'm not going to cut into their time by reading more. Theo has just completed his third year of the doctoral program. They both have last names that are much more complicated, so I'm introducing them as Whit and Theo, and they can tell you that what their full names are. That's the challenge of teaching in a global university, by the way, is the names we get to master. Theo works on politics, and particularly how politics are influenced by new media. He has an extensive publication and convention paper presentation record already, including a top paper award at the upcoming International Communication Association, and not in the student division, I might add, but in the overall division when the senior scholars compete for research. He's also worked with Gail on the NATO project that briefly got mentioned in one of the discussion. And so Theo has a bachelor's degree from the University of Texas and a master's degree from Columbia and another master's degree from the University of London. So this is a persistent, lifelong student. And I don't know how you guys are going to do it. I'm going to get out of your way and let you talk.
Well, thank you so much. Hi, everybody. The last name is Mazumder, and there are a couple of Indians here, so Mazumder.
Not that hard.
Where are you from?
It's the Thai last name.
It's a real pleasure to be here. I'm going to be talking about a study that I just finished very recently, and the title is kind of a mouthful, but it's called What's the Story with Crisis Diplomacy 2.0 and Source Credibility? Twitter Narrative in Israel's Operation Pillar of Defense. Now let me just set the stage for a minute, talking about public diplomacy in general and a shift from an information-driven broadcast media approach, one-to-many approach, to a more relational approach. A relational approach that takes into account things like audience communication networks, intercultural differences, for example, the way that a public might differ from another public based on culture-specific factors. Sure. I just have a lot of slides. I'll slow down. And finally, of course, in this shift in public diplomacy, we need to think about the dialogic social media platforms that are now ubiquitous. Now, the credibility of the source has always been important in public diplomacy and strategic communication. However, what you see in the research literature is little or none from the public diplomacy literature. In fact, all the research is from the for-profit sector. It's from public relations, it's from advertising. And some of these studies are decades old. They tend to focus on two variables, which are expertise and trustworthiness. As I mentioned, no empirical studies from public diplomacy, and this will no longer suffice as notions of credibility are changing online, so this needs updating. And of course, one of the ways that an organization will try to enhance their credibility is by deploying a narrative. And of course, narrative in strategic and crisis communication has long been considered. For example, if we take the war narrative, Campbell and Jameson assert that a war narrative is often embodied in a call that an action is a last resort. So, we find that in almost every military conflict, the initiators of the conflict frame it as a necessary last resort. And of course, there's importance of narrative in all communication. And this is perhaps most clearly set out by the scholar Walter Fisher, who asserts in his narrative paradigm that all human communication can be seen as a set of stories from which people choose. As I mentioned before, online there's an increasing public skepticism towards top-down generators of information. And in part because of this, in this internet-based global network, public diplomacy and politics may boil down to a contest of whose story wins. And then, of course, in these newer social media platforms, how does one consider narrative in a microblog such as Twitter or another social media platform? And that is the subject of my research. Now, I'm concerned here with the Israeli military, the Israel Defense Forces, or the IDF. And they have been, from the outset of social media, the most active military in terms of enhancing or trying to enhance their image via social media platforms. In fact, back in 2008, one of their spokespeople said, the blogosphere and the new media are basically a war zone in a battle for world opinion. And now the operation that I take up in this research is Operation Pillar of Defense. This was an 8-day operation in November 2012, undertaken to cripple terror organizations, quote unquote, and defend Israelis living under fire. So in considering narrative in Twitter disseminated by the IDF, I have a number of research questions here and one hypothesis. So first of all, in text-only tweets, that is tweets without the inclusion of images, how do narrative emphases, and I'll explain that in a moment, affect perceptions of plausibility? Okay, so this first one is concerned with plausibility. And the second research question, how did the text-only tweets affect perceptions of source credibility? And the third one, when I add images to the tweets, how do the images affect judgments of narrative plausibility and source credibility? And finally, I think this is a very interesting point here. What are the effects on source credibility of a social media platform, Twitter, being used for psychological operations or bluster? And I'll show you an example of that in a minute. When you think of a dialogic platform, often thought of as a bottom-up communicative space, what are the effects of that being used for psychological operations? And finally, the public diplomacy literature, which theorizes a conversational 2.0, or theorizes the benefits of a conversational public diplomacy 2.0. I hypothesize here that a Twitter narrative that emphasizes this type of audience outreach, this conversational aspect, will produce higher source credibility ratings than Twitter narratives that do not. So, how do I operationalize narrative here? Content analysis identified 4 main narrative elements in the way the IDF tweeted during this operation. The first is background justification, why the military action was necessary. And here's an example of this narrative element. Israelis living near the Gaza Strip have been living under fire for the past 12 years. Okay? So that's providing background justification for the conflict. The second narrative element is information dissemination, and this is a sort of more a use where the Israelis are updating the public on the conflict. Here's an example: breaking Israeli Navy has struck terror sites in the Gaza Strip. Now, the third narrative element identified by content analysis is, as I just mentioned, bluster, what I call bluster or psychological operations. And here's an example of that.
And you're only looking at English, you won't look at Hebrew or Arabic.
Right. In fact, I'm not aware that the Israelis tweeted in any other language.
Oh, right.
Okay. In fact, I'm fairly certain they did not. So an example here is we recommend that no Hamas operatives, whether low level or senior levels, show their faces above ground in the days ahead. So a clear shot at intimidation, at psychological operations on the social media space.
They wouldn't be reading that, would they? Hamas operatives, they'd be reading in Arabic.
They had dueling narratives on Twitter. So either people that they work with or themselves, they were reading it. But I know I agree with your point that these tweets were probably geared towards an American audience.
Right.
Absolutely, yes. And the fourth element identified here is one that I call public conversation or audience outreach. And here you see an example where this woman here is speculating that some of the rockets fired were intended for Tel Aviv, and the IDF is replying, no, actually that's just propaganda. So you see a clear attempt to engage the public here. Here's one more example of an audience outreach tweet, just asking audiences to like the IDF on Facebook. Okay. These are all sent during this conflict.
That's a metric for effectiveness.
So my study design, it was an online survey with 8 experimental conditions. Now this sounds a little complicated, I'll explain this in a moment. My respondents came from Amazon's Mechanical Turk. So I paid each respondent a nominal amount. I started with 696 respondents, that got whittled down to 534. Now that got whittled down because I had a number of quality control checks, okay? First of all, if any survey respondents took less than 4 minutes to take the survey, I excluded them from the analysis. If in the experimental conditions, when they read the tweets, if they took less than 30 seconds to read those, I also excluded those from the analysis. And finally, if any respondents indicated that they had seen any of the IDF tweets prior to taking the survey, I also excluded those. So I basically wasted a little bit of money there. The part A, I have a number of independent variables here that actually function as control variables. And I don't know how familiar you are with statistics, but these just simply mean I can take these factors into account when I do my analysis, right? So when I look at judgments of credibility, I can take into account respondents' gender, their age, their education, their political affiliation, their religious preference, the amount of trust that the information they see on social media is true, the frequency of their Twitter use, the amount of attention paid to this conflict, and how closely they follow this particular operation, and in general, did they support the Israelis or the Palestinians. So I was able to account for these factors in my analysis.
What are Mechanical Turk?
Mechanical Turk is an online marketplace where you basically, people will take your surveys for a nominal payment. So, I'll put like $200 credit on there, and then however many, I'll pay each one 50 cents, 75 cents, and they'll take your survey. And they used to, it used to be an international user crowd, but I think it's now just North American. Is that right? So these are American respondents. So it's just a way for you to find workers online. But I think they're not doing Indian responses anymore. I think they just changed that. Yeah. So here's what I mean by my experimental conditions. Okay. So to begin each narrative, every respondent saw this tweet, an introductory tweet. The IDF has begun a widespread campaign on terror sites and operatives in the Gaza Strip, chief among them Hamas and Islamic Jihad targets. Every respondent saw that. Also, every respondent saw these middle tweets, which are 4. This is just one of each condition, and the conditions are, again, by narrative emphasis. 1 background, 1 information dissemination, 1 psychological operations, and 1 public conversation. Also, each respondent saw a concluding tweet, a tweet to conclude this narrative. After 8 days, the IDF has accomplished its goals in Operation Flow of Defense. A ceasefire agreement has come into effect. And again, all these were taken actually from tweets during the conflict. Now, the way they differ by condition, after the introductory tweets, each respondent will see 2 tweets according to the condition they're assigned. Okay? And they'll also see 2 tweets according to the condition they're assigned just before the concluding tweet. So in fact, every respondent sees 10 tweets, but 40% of them are changed according to condition. That's how I obtained my conditions and how I manipulated the narrative. Conditions 5 through 8 were the exact same as the ones I just showed you, except in these conditions I did not suppress the images associated with the tweets. So in these conditions, each of these had 3 images associated with the 10 tweets. So for example, in conditions 1 through 4, a respondent might see this. In conditions 5 through 8, a respondent would see this. Now, in conditions 1 through 4, a respondent would see this. In conditions 5 through 8, a respondent would see this. And this is one of the most controversial tweets from the operation. Early on, it was what they billed as a pinpoint strike on the second in command of Hamas military wing. So now when I get to my dependent variables, these are my outcome variables. First, I'm concentrating on narrative plausibility. And this is taken from Robert Yale's narrative believability scale. These are asking respondents whether they disagree or agree with the following. And you can see Cronbach's alpha there of 0.89, so strong reliability on my scale, meaning that it was acceptable to use these as one scale. I believe this communication could be true. It was consistent with other things I know to be true. This communication was plausible. This communication seems to be true. This communication was reasonable. And finally, there's no reason to doubt the facts presented here. Now, moving on to credibility, I was able to find just one study from Min-Jung Kang from Syracuse who actually looked at credibility in the online space, in the social media space. And so this is, again, trying to get away from the notions of credibility that are decades old, perhaps, and come from advertising. First of all, I'm concentrating on the credibility of the blogging organization. This is the IDF. And you see they were asked about whether they thought the IDF was knowledgeable, influential, passionate, transparent, and reliable. Now, passionate and transparent did not cohere enough with the scale to be included. I had to exclude those, leaving the 3 you see up there with moderate reliability to come back alpha of 0.72. And finally, for my outcome variables, I looked at the credibility of the tweet content itself, so not the organization, but the tweets themselves. Again, this came from the same scholar, King, and this was asking whether they thought the tweets were authentic, insightful, informative, consistent, fair, focused, accurate, timely, or popular. I think timely and popular, I put stars by them because I believe these are new considerations for the social media space, which emphasizes immediacy and factors that wouldn't have been considered in the advertising literature. So here are some results, just a couple of highlights here. Okay? If you're familiar with statistics, this is very basic. If you're not, this might be a little complicated. But I used ANCOVA, which is analysis of covariance. This simply allows me to control the means of the respondents from each condition to analyze the means, while controlling for the factors that I mentioned earlier: gender, education, which side they supported. So I used ANCOVA here. So if you look at these means here, strikingly little variance, almost no variance at all. When you look at the means here, this is the number of people who took the questions according to each condition. So look at these means here, almost no variation at all. And when I first looked at these numbers, I started to think, okay, this is just no findings, not moving the dial. But I actually believe that there's something more going on here. I believe that in the social media space, there's information overload, and I think people are missing rhetorical content. But when I added the images, now look at this. Now I bolded this bottom line here. The audience outreach condition with the images, contrary to what I hypothesized, actually is producing lower ratings of plausibility, of credibility, and tweet content credibility. These are significant differences, statistically significant. This is approaching statistically significant. So if you look at the audience outreach with images, compare that to the audience outreach with no images, you see that the no images produce no variation at all. The same exact tweets, once images were added, they actually lowered judgments of plausibility and credibility. Now let me show you. So let me just show you one tweet here that I think may have caused, or at least be partly have caused this these lower estimations of plausibility and credibility. And you can read that. This was one that was only, the image inclusive tweet was only included in that condition that produced that variation. And so finally, just a couple of notes here. What I'm not doing here is assessing the actual Twitter narrative that the IDF disseminated during the conflict. I'm not claiming to do that. What I am doing is seeing which narrative elements produce judgments of credibility, so I'm manipulating the narratives. And I think it's important to note there was a dueling Twitter narrative, and that is that of the Al-Qassam Brigades, which is the military wing of Hamas. They also had a Twitter narrative. However, this was not addressed in my survey, and it shouldn't affect these findings here. And let me just mention that, of course, this is a narrative within a narrative, and the meta-narrative is, of course, a decades-old conflict between the Israelis and the Palestinians. Now, I view these I view these results as a mixed bag for the IDF and perhaps other war information operations departments. Okay? On the one hand, their attempts to provide justification and background for the military action seem to be failing. On the other hand, controversial, very familiar, very really just thought-provoking, controversial language does not seem to be lowering judgments of credibility without the images. And when I looked at the text-only tweets, I found generally insignificant covariance. That meant that even when people said, they support one side or the other, that really did not approach statistical significance. This again adds to my view that perhaps rhetorical intent is being lost in the social media space. This also speaks to the power of images. Okay, when these images are attached to the tweets, it did move the dial. Okay, so this speaks to the power of images in the online space. And finally, we see a lot of sweeping theorization of public diplomacy 2.0. People lauding a conversational public diplomacy 2.0, that if you just reach out to the audience and engage them, that it's going to increase judgments of credibility. That may not be the case. And now this could be only, my findings may only apply to a war narrative, and that's what further research needs to take up. But in any case, this sweeping theorization of public diplomacy 2.0 needs to be thought. And just going forward in future studies, I'd like to see this type of study duplicated with for example, State Department tweets instead of military tweets, and also just applied to other types of public diplomacy, issues of culture, cultural exchanges, and that sort of thing. Thank you so much for your time. I look forward to your questions.
If it's okay, we're going to hold the questions until after Whit speaks, so that the questions that we ask Theo don't absorb all of Whit's time. And then we'll have questions for both of them, okay? So write your question down. If you're worried you'll lose track of it, because we are going to make Theo answer some tough questions. Whit, I'm going to give you the same amount of time. Sure. Please be as efficient as you can so we have questions.
So I'm going to present my work with NTV Exit, who is NTV is international broadcaster airing music videos that you have heard. And since 2006, basically NTV has been involving with this issue, anti-human trafficking campaigns, and they have received funding from USAID, from 2006 to organize mass media campaigns throughout Asia Pacific. So basically, just to give you a general sense of what human trafficking is, human trafficking basically is a phenomenon in which human beings are bought and sold for profits. Mostly in three things: for commercial sexual exploitation, for domestic exploitation, and the third one would be for general labor trafficking in sweatshops, factories, in the fishing industries, mostly predominant in Asia Pacific. And this statistic is from the International Labor Organization. From 2005, it gets cited a lot that there are about 2.5 million people worldwide who are being trafficked worldwide right now. Other statistics range from 7 million to 27 million from various NGOs. So this whole campaign is basically using media campaigns as a vehicle for social change. NTV basically believe that how well moving images, music, television can influence people to adopt new behavior, to join the fight against human trafficking. And media campaigns in general, they produce specific goals, outcomes, and impacts by targeting a sizable number of people who, whatever organization you want to target, and through a series of activities, via communication and media channels. And campaigns are normally designed to increase public knowledge, change attitudes and behavior on various health and social issues. And there's extensive literature that's saying all the mass media campaigns with rigorous outcome evaluation can produce some effects, 7 to 10%. Not a lot, but considering when we are reaching millions of people, that would be a sizable outcome. So why MTV is working with USAID on this? Well, basically MTV has a very extensive network throughout the world. In Asia Pacific alone, they reached approximately 300 million households. So USAID found them to be a good strategic partner. And the core demographic, young men and women, are the most vulnerable group to trafficking. Up to 50% on the statistic from IOM, International Office of Migration. They estimated that 50% of people below 25 years old who are normally victims of trafficking since they are young, able-bodied people. And normally people become victims through ignorance, deception, and fraud by human traffickers. And so MTV thought, creating a campaign to just create general awareness would help prevent that. So I mentioned this a little bit, so we're just going to move on. So since 2006, the campaign has now reached over 17 million people in over 21 countries, mostly in Asia Pacific. And they also have leveraged over $100 million, in form of in-kind contributions and investment from donors. USAID invested approximately $8 million so far for the MTV Exit campaign. Australian International Development Agency has joined this campaign in 2011, and I think they have invested about close to $2 million. And from what I hear from MTV Exit team, they just told me they just got extended for another 4 years of funding from 2013 onward. So, and So they have these four core components of their campaign strategies: broadcasting on air, on-the-ground activities, mostly concerts, and online activities and youth activism components. Basically, more grassroots, activities where they go into communities, recruit youth leaders, and train them on how to do campaign organizing and activism training. So objectives, as I've mentioned, is to create awareness and increase prevention of human trafficking and inspire young people to take action on this issue. So target audience, young people at risk, people who are not at risk but did represent the demand that underlines trafficking. This is important because people are so ignorant that this issue exists. Sometimes, especially in Thailand, for example, there was a survey back in about 10 years ago that said about 7 to 8 men out of 10 men, have visited prostitution because it's just a cultural norm. So sometimes they are not even aware that they are contributing, to fuel human trafficking within their own country. And so we want to encourage, the culture of opinion leaders who are young people who can become activists, and start to mobilize, their peers, their community to also join, this action against trafficking. So this is how the campaign is divided into two geographic regions. Basically, we have Asia Pacific, and Australia is included in that, and we have Southeast Asia countries, China, Indonesia, all these countries, East Asia, and also South Asia, which is Bangladesh, India, and Pakistan. The two markets are just so completely different. And Asia Pacific in itself is a very complex region. Southeast Asia, as you can imagine, each country will speak different languages, very different culture, ethnicity. So it adds a lot of complexity to this campaign because we have to localize every campaign material to each country. So I'm going to play like a short clip, 2-minute clip about what we have done so far.
This is a film about freedoms, about our rights as human beings to choose where we live, where we work, our friends, and who we love. Most of us take these freedoms for granted. But hundreds of thousands of people throughout the world have had these basic human rights taken away. They are victims of trafficking.
Susunod na 30 minuto ay makikilala natin ang mga taong kasama sa trafficking siya.
Parallel stories running, one of them, a little boy in the West, one in a sweatshop in the East. I think it's cool that, actually they're taking this up because normally this is something that I only get to talk to people about, like, who are considered left wing. It's good that it's in the mainstream.
Learn to sell dreams. Make sure your chosen equal trusts. Our business is free.
Millions of people are trafficked and exploited every year to produce these fabulous gifts that you have won here tonight. See you next time with the theme of the decade.
So that's some of the online components of the campaign. There's actually a lot more programming since then, and they have produced now 2 more documentaries and more localized versions with local stories instead of just the same version across different countries and just have subtitles in it. That was based on the research that says, some countries like Japan, for example, did not really receive the story, mostly in Southeast Asia, very well. They just don't really care about the problems in Southeast Asia. So we include stories of trafficking in their own community in Japan in that version. So it's just a summary of what they have done. And in order to design the message, there's actually some rigorous formative research that that went on before they formalized all the campaign messages. They did partner with a lot of local NGOs, local governmental agencies, and law enforcement, and to talk to them about what kind of messages that we want to communicate to the public. And we found out, these basically 5 components that we want to talk about: safe migration message, general awareness about prevention, what human trafficking is, how we are part of the human trafficking chain, and why we should join the cause, demand for sex trafficking, like demand for commercial sex work that drive human trafficking, and forced prostitution, basically, and also talk about labor trafficking demand, and encourage people to have responsible consumption, to know where the sources of their products come from. And the third one, domestic service demand, that domestic workers are the main for people who work in the non-formal sector. They also need to have rights and should not be abused just because of their immigration status. A lot of people in Asia, they migrate illegally, and the public believe like because they do illegally, they can be exploited, however they want. And we just want to say like that's not the case. They should have basic human rights too. So I won't go into this. If you're interested, you can visit intubasic.org, and all of the documentaries are uploaded online, and they are available in many language versions. So you can contact me, or if you want, you can contact them directly to get the version you want. This is the Indian version. So the story is slightly different based on local needs and basically what the local NGO has recommended, and gain access to entry to all these stories for us. So from 2007 to 2010, this is our reach, about 3.2 million people based on these 2 documentaries. Obviously, it's a problematic summary. A lot of the market do not have rating systems. In fact, I think only 5 and 34, airings out of like 116 airings we have rating systems. So we don't have a lot of information, and that's typically working in developing countries in general. NTV actually hired a market research firm to do evaluation for mass media campaigns. If you're aware, the whole research area for this kind of work has been really lackluster. People just do it and don't really evaluate the effects of the campaigns. And USA, they were working with NTV to try to find independent evaluator to try to evaluate the impact. And basically, we want to find, we did 2 things: qualitative study, focus groups. We showed them the documentaries and just talked to them, about how the documentaries, change their behavior, attitudes, and knowledge about the issue before and after, watching the show. And quantitative is basically an online survey. We did it at select countries. So I'm not going to go into those, but just to show you like the general results. So basically the general results. So this is awareness of human trafficking. People are familiar with it. This is after the show. So the percentage really varied, across countries. China is really low. Japan is really low. It's interesting to find out like the more developed the country, the less people know about the issue. And this is sort of like the breakdown of people decide to migrate to find work or to study. And this is an indication of the risk of people who should be exposed to this message so they can protect themselves. So overall, we come up with the composite scores. So after watching the show, most of the people, increase their knowledge, attitudes, and behavior. And as you can see, for countries that have really low scores, the percentage tends to go up a lot higher. So they found things to be effective. So, all right. So I'm going to end my presentation here and just summarize that at this point, Patty and I, we just submitted a grant to USAID to conduct sort of like a public opinion research study in Indonesia. Basically, we find the methodology that NCVC has done quite flawed. They use a very standard knowledge, attitude, behavior as their methodology to try to find impacts. So now we are interested more in other components, like what about community, like community norms, social norms, and other factors like other environmental factors, if they in fact influence how people perceive their opinion about human trafficking, and how changing those other components, external components, could also help, not just like individual. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Whit. Thank you, Theo. And now we have 10 or so minutes for questions for either speaker. Please.
I have a question for him.
Whit.
Yes, for Whit. Thank you. My first question is, what kind of theoretical model did you use to prepare your campaign? And the second question, after conducting this evaluation, how did you come up with this conclusion that your campaign contributed to the increase of knowledge, attitude, behavior, when we know that there were also some other media which were also conveying the same message?
Right. So the first question, in terms of what kind of model we use the GAP model, the knowledge, attitudes, and practice model, which has been in the public health sector for the past 30, 40 years. We actually did not just develop it, based on our own internal process. We had a workshop with the NGOs, USAID, and a lot of agencies working on this issue. To try to come up with sort of a matrix, of what kind of knowledge that we should communicate to the public about this issue, what kind of attitudes we want to change. And in this presentation, I actually have a breakdown, but I didn't get a chance to. I can email it to Tom, and yeah, we can share it here. So we did that. And for the second question, you were asking how...
Whether the results you got, how did you conclude that the results you got were attributable to your campaign?
So we collected data, sort of experiment with control groups, as well as people who were exposed to the documentary. So people who were exposed to the documentary has a higher knowledge, attitudes and behavior scores than people with content for that. So
yes. For Whit, right? my question is the initial data about prevalence of human trafficking. One estimate is 2.7, the other is 27 million. That was a factor of 10. What accounts for that discrepancy? For taking that, how do you make the adjustments?
This is like
you're doing the monitoring and evaluation in terms of the numbers.
This is the biggest question in the whole human trafficking research sector. The number, the 2.45 million, is based on ILO, which is like UN technically. So a lot of people think that they have a rigorous methodology, when in fact it's not. A lot of it is extrapolation. They just try to find information from a few agencies working in different areas, and they just extrapolate it throughout the country and find that number. It's really problematic. And so far, I can say at this point, there's no reliable number on human trafficking. All the number that's been spewed out by the NGOs are, I would say, self-serving, just to get funding from agencies. I'm not saying it doesn't exist.
If I could give you one example, in Hong Kong, for instance, they'll bring Filipino, Indonesian maids in. They're not considered human trafficking, it's a labor contract. If the terms of the contract are honored, everything's okay. It becomes human trafficking, and they don't honor the terms of the contract.
Yeah.
Don't pay them, loan the money under false pretenses. That's why there's some ambiguity.
The term has this really, it's like a direction really, because you don't have to be transported to be considered a human trafficking motive. You can enter into a labor contract consensually, but if during your stay there, there's exploitation going on or there are labor rights violation, it can be considered trafficking.
Can we get a question for Theo?
I have a question for you.
Very good.
Your presentation talked about the meta-narrative of the war itself, the whole Israeli-Palestinian conflict. I suppose that's the body of the grand narrative of that conflict. And you talked about later on in the implementation of your analysis, the mini battle, the dueling narratives between the IDF and Al-Qassam, the militant arm of it. The question now becomes to what extent does the historical printed weight of the meta-narrative, because we all know what the thing's about, and most people, the moment you say Arab-Israeli conflict, you take inside of it, you have a sense of to what extent did that narrative overshadow some of the analysis in terms of measuring the minor, micro-narrative duel between IDF and the Palestinians. The other thing is that on the IDF's part, to what extent did they seek to justify that particular military exercise within the context of the meta-narrative? The secondary part of it was, as I understand, if I recall, it was there were missiles being dropped or there were rockets being fired into Israel, and we have to stop that, right? That was basically why we're going to war, right? But how does that fit into the meta-narrative of this larger, and did they exploit it? Did they say, well, historically we've also invaded them, or was that part of it?
No, it wasn't. And I suspect had that been part of it, it might have, it perhaps could have increased judgments of credibility. It was not, to answer your first question, the meta-narrative hopefully didn't impact my results all that much, because that's why it was so important for me to control for those other variables that I mentioned. And that's why I used the technique ANCOVA, analysis of covariance, which was to say that I asked respondents which side they favored. I asked them how much knowledge they have of this particular conflict. I asked them what were the degree of support for each side. So, of course, this issue is always thought about in terms of that meta-narrative, but as far as these specific results, I was able to statistically account for those factors.
The other thing also was that you mentioned that the tweets were mostly in English.
Yes,
right?
they were all in English.
So it's a sense that they weren't actually appealing to the Hebrew-speaking Israeli audience, right? And I noticed, I think you had about 200,000 followers, right? Or something in that region.
Yes.
Okay, so where, if you were to do an analytics, where were those followers coming from? Where was that support coming from?
I would imagine, well, the Israeli diaspora probably located in America and other Western countries. I mean, this outreach is geared towards the American public and perhaps more toward the American media, because these tweets were then picked up by CNN, which then embedded those tweets in their coverage.
Okay.
And of course, you know about the degree of aid America gives to Israel. Without American support, Israel can't execute its foreign policy. And so I think there's little doubt that this was geared towards American eyes, whether directly through public or through media.
Probably Western Europe too.
Western Europe too, yeah.
Where they face a huge
Right.
challenge in terms of changing opinion of Israel and Western Europe.
Right.
Yeah, three fast questions. Number one, why did you pick this conflict-specific war narrative? Two, do you have any idea whether the 250,000 followers were paid or they're real followers? And three, can this scenario, some of the results, be applied to the same model using Facebook?
Those are very good questions. I have no idea whether they're paid followers or not. That seems antithetical to the nature of Twitter, but I mean, it's very possible.
Because I say that there's a lot of celebrities like Obama, a lot of singers, they bought like a package, 200,000, 300,000, and they probably have 1 million. Let's say out of the 1 million, maybe 200,000 are real. The rest is all fake.
Right.
So is there a way to maybe figure out the real from the fake?
Through the technology, I'm not aware of a way, but keep in mind my respondents were from Amazon's Mechanical Turk. These are completely separate from the actual followers. My survey, in fact, if my respondents had indicated they had seen any of the tweets before, I excluded them from analysis. Just for information's sake, that only amounted to about 18. So, most people on Amazon Mechanical Turk were not aware of this campaign. And I think it's very interesting, the comparison with Facebook. I don't think you can generalize these findings to Facebook. Each social media platform has its own peculiarities, and so that would be a very interesting follow-on project because these platforms are very different. So no, I don't think they can be applied.
Kind of along the same lines. Twitter is specifically, there are ways you receive Twitter messages. You can get it directly by being a follower, or then someone can retweet it, or then you can get it from a third party like CNN that posts about it. And you're testing people who have never seen these before, but isn't the point of Twitter to reach people who specifically asked to be reached, or people who are in those networks? And have you done any of the network analysis of who's actually receiving these messages and how they correspond with your findings?
Right, I have not, but I think that's a fantastic project, that from a network analysis methodology. I have not done that work, perhaps in the future.
Because perhaps it's more, these tweets are more influential with the target audience, which are actually the followers or the friends of the followers.
Right. But keep in mind, I'm making internal comparisons between these conditions and which ones might, but I think it's a great point.
It goes in line with what Francois Barr said the other day about where the message can land. You can see who's actually reading it and how many retweets and what these people.
Right. Interestingly enough, they did allow comments on these tweets, which I did not show respondents, but they did allow comments, even some that were, off color.
Sadly, all good things must come to an end. Cabby is all over. One very quick question.
Can you just recap the conclusion from your research? Was it that it didn't really have an impact as long as there were no
Exactly. I was bowled over, both from a standpoint, I was like, uh-oh, no findings. When there was only text, there was no variation in judgments of credibility or plausibility, basically nil. But when I included the images, there was one condition that produced all the variation, and that was their attempts to engage with audience outreach and include images. This suggests that the audience is skeptical. The audience is they're smart about these platforms.
I was preaching to the converted. That's my sense of Twitter is that a lot of it is just circulating within networks of people who agree, and therefore it doesn't move any opinions.
Right. Well, that falls along with that question, which is that network analysis standpoint, which is very important to look at.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.